You know that saying about curiosity and cats? Yeah, that was me, a curious cat pawing at a shiny, mysterious invitation. Except instead of finding a delightful treat, I got myself tangled in a confusing ball of yarn. Or rather, into the world of Lisa's so-called exclusive party. It all began at a regular house party, the kind where the chips are stale, and the music sounds like a Spotify playlist set to random. I was balancing a questionable mojito when Lisa appeared. Mid-30s, edgy but approachable, the kind of woman you secretly want to impress but can't figure out why. We talked briefly about nonsense, probably cats or Netflix, and that was it. Or so I thought. Fast forward 2 weeks. Lisa pops up in my DMs. Hey, I'm hosting something this weekend. You should come. It'll be fun, winky face. That winking emoji was doing some heavy lifting. Now, most people would have asked follow-up questions. Not me. Nope, I RSVP'd with a nonchalant sure, thinking how bad can it be? Saturday night rolls around, and I'm standing outside Lisa's place. A modest house with no hint of what's brewing inside. The music was low, the kind that seemed to hum like a secret in the air. Relax, I muttered to myself, trying to channel confidence as I pushed open the door. Spoiler, it didn't work. Inside, the scene was almost cinematic. Low lights, plush furniture, and people who looked like they belonged in glossy magazines. The vibe was intoxicating in that is this a movie set kind of way. Lisa appeared from nowhere, as if summoned by my unease. Her smile as warm as her drink invitation. Glad you came, she said, offering me a glass of wine. Just mingle, have fun. Mingle. If by mingle, you mean hover by the bar, sipping nervously while attempting to look cool. As I scanned the room, I noticed the crowd. Couples whispering conspiratorially, a few singles, and one guy so unervingly good-looking he might have been an AI experiment. Then came the moment. A group of men entered, their presence commanding the room. 6 in total, tall and confident, the kind of men who make you forget how to form sentences. I wasn't prepared for the intensity of their collective gaze, like I was the most intriguing exhibit in an art gallery. Lisa, ever the observant hostess, sidled up to me. Looks like you've caught some attention, she murmured, her tone dripping with mischief. My cheeks flushed. Was this what I signed up for? What did I sign up for? As the night went on, the room grew warmer, not from the thermostat but from the atmosphere. The men were magnetic, their energy contagious, and the tension almost palpable. Flirty exchanges turned into playful banter, and before I knew it, I was swept into their circle. It was thrilling until it wasn't. The intensity became overwhelming, like a spotlight I couldn't escape. My heart raced. Not from excitement anymore, but from the sudden weight of their attention. Excusing myself, I stumbled outside for air. The cool night hit me like a splash of sanity, and I breathed deeply, trying to untangle the knot of emotions in my chest. Lisa found me moments later, her face a mix of concern and knowing. You okay? She asked. I smiled weakly. I think I just need a moment. Take your time, she said, her voice soothing. It's all about what you're comfortable with. I nodded, but as I stood there under the stars, I realized this wasn't just a party. It was a test of my boundaries, my courage, and maybe even my sanity. And this was just the beginning. If I'd been feeling like the protagonist of a romantic comedy before, that moment outside was the abrupt transition into psychological thriller territory. The cool night air had given me a second wind. Or maybe it was just panic masquerading as resolve. Either way, I wasn't ready to run just yet. Instead, I decided to give it another shot. I'm fine, I told Lisa when she checked on me again, though my voice carried all the conviction of a student caught sneaking a test glance. Really, I am. Let's go back inside. Lisa studied me for a moment, her expression softening into approval. That's the spirit. But remember, you call the shots, okay? She slipped her arm through mine, leading me back into the lion's den. The room was no less charged than when I'd left, but now I noticed the dynamics more clearly. The couples huddled together with a quiet intensity, and the singles, the men in particular, moved through the space like they owned it. It was magnetic, intoxicating, and a little unnerving all at once. The tall, dark-eyed man I'd noticed earlier approached me as soon as I stepped back in. He wasn't just handsome. He was dangerous in that what's your darkest secret kind of way. "Glad you're back," he said, his voice low and smooth like the first sip of whiskey. I nodded, muttering something that I hoped sounded breezy but probably landed closer to incoherent. Before I could even process what was happening, he was guiding me to the center of the room, where a loose circle had formed. If the atmosphere had been charged before, it was nuclear now. Every glance, every gesture felt amplified, like the world had shifted into high definition. I couldn't tell if it was the wine, the lighting, or the sheer audacity of it all, but I felt exposed. And not in the fun, spontaneous way. More like I was under a microscope, every breath, every blink scrutinized. The conversations around me faded into a dull hum, and I realized the tall man was still talking to me. His words flowed effortlessly, a mix of playful banter and barely veiled suggestion. I tried to match his energy, but my nerves betrayed me. Every laugh felt forced, every smile plastered on like a poorly fitting mask. Then it happened. Someone, maybe him, maybe one of the others, reached out and brushed a lock of hair from my face. It was a small gesture, but it set off a tidal wave in me. Suddenly I felt trapped. The room, once warm and inviting, now felt suffocating. The men had closed in tighter, their attention laser-focused, and I felt like a prize they were all competing for. "I need to step out again," I blurted, spinning on my heel before anyone could stop me. I barely made it to the kitchen before the tears started. Great, now I was that girl, the one who shows up to the party and has a meltdown in the middle of it. I leaned against the counter, taking shaky breaths and willing myself to pull it together. And then, like clockwork, Lisa appeared again. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a glass of water and waited. Her presence was grounding in a way I desperately needed. "I don't think this is for me," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's okay," she said simply. "No one's keeping you here." Her words hit me harder than they should have. It wasn't judgment or disappointment, it was understanding. And in that moment, I realized Lisa wasn't just hosting a party. She was navigating a world she understood intimately, and she respected that it wasn't for everyone. I stayed in the kitchen for a while longer, sipping my water and letting the hum of the party fade into the background. When I finally felt composed enough to rejoin the crowd, I made my way back to the main room. To my surprise, the energy had shifted. People were still mingling and flirting, but it wasn't as intense as before. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe I just hit my limit for the night, but I decided to take a step back. I found a quieter corner and watched the room unfold, a fly on the wall in a space where I didn't quite belong. It was fascinating in a way, like observing a culture I didn't fully understand but could appreciate from a distance. By the time I left, the night had taught me something important. Not every adventure is meant to be embraced. Some are simply meant to be observed, to be learned from. And as I stepped into the cool night air, I realized I didn't regret coming, because even though it wasn't what I'd expected, it was exactly what I needed to see. I woke up the next morning with the kind of clarity that only comes after a night of utter chaos. My head wasn't pounding, thankfully. I'd nursed my one glass of wine like it was the Holy Grail, but my mind was racing with thoughts from the night before. It was like my brain was trying to stitch together the loose threads of what had happened and make sense of it. Spoiler alert. It didn't. Lisa texted me later that afternoon. "Hey, just checking in. How are you feeling?" It was a simple message, but it carried a weight that only someone who truly understood the night's intensity could deliver. "Better," I replied, though I wasn't sure if that was entirely true. "Thanks for looking out for me last night." Her response came quickly. "Anytime. These things can be a lot, especially the first time. Don't sweat it." I stared at my phone for a moment, trying to decide if I wanted to ask the million-dollar question that had been nagging me since I'd walked out of her house. Why do people do this? Instead, I just left it at that. Lisa didn't owe me any explanations, and honestly, I wasn't ready for them. I needed to process what I'd seen, what I'd felt, and most importantly, what I'd learned about myself. Over the next few days, I replayed the night in my head like a movie on an endless loop. The thrill, the fear, the awkwardness, and even the fleeting moments of exhilaration, they all blended into a cocktail of emotions I couldn't quite name. I realized that the allure of Lisa's party wasn't just about the people or the setting. It was about stepping out of my comfort zone and confronting the parts of myself I'd never really acknowledged. For one, I'd never been more aware of my boundaries, or how easily they could be tested. It wasn't that anyone had crossed them, but being in that space had made me hyper-conscious of where I drew my lines and how firmly I was willing to hold them. And then there was the attention. It wasn't just the men or their intensity. It was the way they made me feel seen, in a way that was both exhilarating and deeply uncomfortable. I wasn't used to being the center of attention like that, and it forced me to confront a truth I'd been avoiding. I craved connection, but on my own terms. By the end of the week, I felt a strange sense of gratitude for the experience, as overwhelming as it had been. It wasn't something I'd rush to repeat, but it had taught me more about myself than I ever could have learned from a night of Netflix and ice cream. Lisa and I met for coffee a few days later. It felt like the natural next step, neutral ground where I could ask the questions that had been swirling in my head without the weight of last weekend hanging over us. So I began, stirring my latte a little too vigorously. Why do you host these parties? Lisa smiled knowingly. I get that question a lot. Honestly, it's not about the party itself. It's about creating a space where people can be themselves, no judgment, no pretense. Everyone's there for their own reasons, but at the core, it's about connection. Not the superficial kind, but the kind that makes you feel alive. I nodded slowly, her words sinking in. I get that, I think. But it's intense. It is, she admitted. And it's not for everyone. But you went, and that says something. What does it say? I asked, half expecting her to drop some profound wisdom on me. It says you're braver than you think, she replied simply. I laughed, though her words hit me harder than I expected. Bravery wasn't a word I would have used to describe myself, but maybe she had a point. It had taken courage to step into Lisa's world, to face the unknown, and to walk away when I needed to. As we parted ways, Lisa gave me a hug and a piece of advice that stuck with me. Don't let one night define you, but let it teach you something. You'd be surprised how much you can learn when you step into the unknown. And she was right. The night of Lisa's party wasn't just a wild adventure. It was a mirror. It reflected my fears, my insecurities, and my resilience. It pushed me to ask hard questions about who I was and what I wanted, and for that I was grateful. Would I ever go back? Probably not. But I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. It's funny how life has a way of sorting things out for you. After Lisa's party and our coffee debrief, I thought I'd put the experience behind me. Chalk it up as one for the books and move on. But the truth, that night kept sneaking back into my thoughts. Not in a haunting way, but like a quiet whisper reminding me of all the questions I'd yet to answer about myself. I threw myself into the week's routine. Work, gym, grocery shopping, Netflix. For a few days it felt like I was back on solid ground. But one night, as I lay in bed scrolling through social media, I saw a post from Lisa. A picture of her living room, lit with the same warm glow from that night, captioned simply, "Another unforgettable evening." Stirred something in me. Not regret exactly, but a kind of wistfulness. I wasn't longing for the party itself. I knew that wasn't my world. But I missed the bravery it had demanded of me. The audacity to step outside my comfort zone, to be seen, to say yes to something entirely unknown. I'd gotten a taste of that, and it made me realize how much of my life I'd spent saying no. Not just to wild invitations, but to the quieter risks too. The new hobbies I'd been too shy to try, the friendships I'd let fade, the dreams I'd shelved because they felt too big. That night I made a list. Nothing dramatic, just a few things I wanted to say yes to, starting now. The first thing on the list. Take a dance class. The irony wasn't lost on me as I walked into the studio that Saturday morning, clutching a water bottle and trying not to look like I'd just signed up for public humiliation. The instructor, a whirlwind of energy named Marla, greeted me with a smile so wide it practically forced me to relax. "First time?" she asked, her voice warm and encouraging. I nodded, trying not to trip over my own feet. "Good," she said. "That's the best time." By the end of the hour I was sweaty, slightly sore, and grinning like an idiot. It wasn't the most graceful attempt at salsa anyone had ever seen, but it was mine. And for once, I didn't care about being perfect. I was just proud I'd shown up. The next thing on my list: rekindle an old friendship. I reached out to Mia, my college roommate. We'd drifted apart over the years. Different cities, different lives. But I'd always missed her quick wit and unshakable optimism. To my surprise, she replied almost instantly. Gee, yes. Let's catch up. Brunch this Sunday." Sitting across from Mia at a sunny cafe, it was like no time had passed. We laughed, swapped stories, and promised not to let another year go by without seeing each other. As I walked home, I felt lighter, like I'd found a piece of myself I hadn't even realized was missing. The final thing on the list: confront my fears. This one was trickier, less tangible. It wasn't about signing up for something or texting someone. It was about sitting with myself and asking hard questions. What was I afraid of? Failure? Judgment? Discomfort? All of the above. I spent a lot of time journaling, letting the words spill out without judgment. It was messy and uncomfortable, but it was also freeing. Slowly, I started to see patterns, ways I'd held myself back, stories I'd told myself about what I could and couldn't do. And you know what? I started rewriting those stories. It's been a few months since Lisa's party, and life feels different now. Not in a flashy, dramatic way, but in the quiet, steady way that real change happens. I've said yes to more things, stepped into more unknowns, and learned to trust myself in the process. Lisa and I still keep in touch, though I haven't been back to one of her parties. She gets it and she never pushes. Every now and then she'll send me a text. "Still proud of you for showing up that night." And honestly, I'm proud of me too. The party wasn't just a wild experience. It was a catalyst. It shook me out of my routine, forced me to confront my fears, and reminded me of the power of saying yes, not just to others but to myself. So, here's to Lisa's party, to the lessons it taught me, and to the person it helped me become. Because sometimes the most unforgettable nights aren't the ones you want to relive, but the ones that change you forever.